15 years ago, Lyle and Marie McCann, an elderly couple from St. Albert, Alberta, went on a road trip to British Columbia, and they never returned.
Tonight, new information, interviews, and images in the case of Lyle and Marie McCann.
The St. Albert couple has been missing now for more than 4 months. In part one of a special report, David Owasik looks into what was seen at Minnow Lake in the hours before the McCann's motorhome went up in flames.
Their burnt-out RV was located west of Edmonton. Their bodies have not been found. But their killer has been convicted and has been serving time behind bars, and he is eligible for parole. The idea that someone can be convicted of murdering people, hiding their remains so that their family has to go through the ongoing trauma of not knowing where their loved ones are, or not having the dignity of a proper burial, being allowed to go out free on parole, is unthinkable. And yet, that is the state of Canada today. Travis Vader, a broke drug addict, was convicted of murdering Lyle and Marie McCann. Investigators believe that he came across Lyle and Marie while they were driving across Canada at the beginning of a road trip. He murdered them in a robbery. The bodies have never been recovered, and in cases where bodies have not been recovered, it is very difficult to get a conviction. But he was seen by witnesses the very day of Lyle and Marie's disappearance, driving their SUV. His fingerprints were found in their vehicle. A blood-stained ball cap that belonged to Lyle McCann had Travis Vader's DNA on it. And Travis Vader used the McCann cell phone to text and call his former girlfriend the very day they disappeared. This is overwhelmingly strong circumstantial evidence that a judge determined proved Travis Vader guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
From the evidence I have accepted and based on the inferences drawn from that evidence, I conclude beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Vader committed murder. Travis Edward Vader, I do find you guilty of second-degree murder of Lyle and Marie McCann near Piers, Alberta, on or about July 3, 2010.
Vader continues to serve time today. He has refused to acknowledge that he murdered Lyle and Marie McCann, and he has refused to provide any material information that would lead to the recovering of their remains. And yet, in our country, a man, a murderer like Travis Vader, is eligible for parole. This is outrageous. Lyle and Marie McCann were in the twilight of their lives. They had worked hard, they'd raised a family, they were looking forward to a road trip to beautiful British Columbia, something that all Canadians dream of. And yet, in the final years of their lives, they were brutally and violently cut short by this killer. At the beginning of this Parliament, I introduced my private member's bill, McCanns Law. And McCanns Law seeks to change the criminal code so that we can give judges, parole boards, and correctional authorities the tools that they need, should they choose to use them, to hold killers who withhold information about the remains of their victims accountable. This is common sense legislation. It's not partisan legislation. It's legislation needed to help families of victims recover the remains of their loved ones. No body, no parole. When a judge determines, after somebody has been convicted of an offense involving the murder and disappearance of a victim, the judge has the power to put an order that requires the parole board to explicitly consider whether an offender has provided that material information to aid in the recovery of their victims' remains. And finally, it would give correctional officers the ability to withhold day releases or temporary absences for those who have withheld information that would lead to the recovery of a victim's remains. This legislation is important because just last year, Travis Vader was up for parole. And the only two considerations that the parole board had to consider was whether releasing him would pose an undue risk to society and whether his release would promote the protection of society. Never did they have to consider whether he had admitted to the guilt of his crime, nor was he ever required to provide material information on the recovery of his victim's remains. And I think that's wrong. The idea that somebody could be granted parole to freely walk the streets of our country while the location of their victims' remains, while their bodies remained hidden from their families, is wrong. What Mr. Vader is doing and what killers like him are doing when they refuse to disclose the location of their victims' remains is committing a further crime against the families of those victims. Their ongoing refusal is a refusal to take accountability for their actions, and it is an ongoing attack on the rights of victims and their families. Some people come up to me and say, well, Dane, what if he's innocent? This killer was convicted on an overwhelming body of evidence. And in Canada, it is extremely rare that somebody would be convicted when no bodies have been recovered. And yet, in this case, a judge determined that the level of the evidence met an extremely high bar, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Mr. Vader was guilty. So when people come up to me and say, Dane, we can't support your legislation because Travis Vader says he's innocent. And what if he is innocent? Well, I say to them, it's not up for politicians like me, and it's not up for parole boards to determine whether a judge or a jury got it wrong. My job as an elected member of parliament is to put forward laws that represent the will of Canadians. And I believe that somebody who has been convicted by a judge or by a jury of their peers based on overwhelming evidence and who refuses to take accountability for that crime and refuses to provide information that allows the remains of his victims to be repatriated to their family doesn't deserve to go free anytime. And that's why I brought forward McCanns Law. I grew up around St. Albert. And in 2010, when I saw Lyle and Marie McCann's billboards looking for them, I thought of my own grandparents who lived in St. Albert and how I wouldn't stop until I did everything I could to ensure that their killers were held accountable and that their remains were returned so that we could have the dignity of a proper burial. And that's why we need McCanns Law, because no killer should be allowed to walk free while they withhold information on the location of their victims.